Hello and welcome back to the Crime Reel. Today's case is not only shocking in its depravity, but also due to the ineffective policing which led to a violent offender being able to roam free for many years, continuing his reign of terror over the women of Glasgow. There was so much evidence in this case and so many moments where this story could have been solved that the catalogue of missed opportunities is truly breathtaking. Our story today involves the Caldwell family from Scotland. Emma was born on the 31st of January 1978. She was the second daughter of Margaret and William Caldwell. She grew up in a loving home and had a very happy childhood, with her mother describing her as lovely, just perfect. We called her our little snowdrop. Emma developed a keen interest in horses and became a horse riding teacher. However, the family's lives were ripped apart when Emma's older sister, Karen, died of cancer in 1998. Emma struggled to deal with the grief of losing her sister and, at the age of 22, sat down with her parents and said that she had something to tell them. In trying to numb her pain, she had become addicted to heroin. Her parents were in shock. They knew nothing about drugs and did not know what to do or where to go for help. They went to the emergency department at the hospital but were turned away. They talked through the night and hoped that their daughter's confession would be the turning point in her breaking her addiction. Sadly, this was not the case. Emma continued to use heroin, moved out of the family home into a woman's hostel in Glasgow, but remained in close contact with her parents. She would phone them every day. Her father would visit her every Wednesday, and her mother would collect her at the weekend to drive her home for dinner. Unknown to her parents, Emma had also become a sex worker on Glasgow's streets in order to fund her drug addiction. Each day she would pick up methadone from the chemist near the hostel in Inglefield Street. On Wednesday the 6th of April 2005, William visited his daughter at the usual time. However, she was not there. At times, Emma would not keep to their visits, so this was not an immediate cause for concern. However, when the daily phone call stopped and her mother could not make contact with her for the weekend visit, alarm bells began to ring in their heads. Emma was reported missing on the 10th of April and a missing persons inquiry was launched. It was established that Emma had last been seen at around 10:45 p.m. on Monday the 4th of April as she was preparing to go to work in Glasgow's city centre. For the next 5 weeks, Margaret and William drove around the city day and night, searching for their daughter. Then, on Sunday the 8th of May, came the news that they had been dreading. A dog walker had found Emma's body in a shallow ditch in remote woodland near Roberton in Lanarkshire, which was about an hour's drive from Glasgow. She was naked and had been strangled to death. The missing persons inquiry had turned into a murder investigation. In the previous 10 years, 6 other sex workers had been murdered whilst working the Glasgow streets. Although it is unclear if these murders were linked, none of them had been solved, and as such the investigating force, Strathclyde Police, were under huge pressure to solve this case. It would become one of Scotland's biggest murder inquiries, with the senior investigating officer, Detective Superintendent Willie Johnston, becoming the public face of the inquiry. Under the name Operation Grail, 50 police officers would take over 8,000 statements, seize hundreds of vehicles, and take hundreds of DNA samples. It was an incredibly complex operation, with many of Glasgow's sex workers dealing with hundreds of clients at that time. Many of these women had often been subjected to excessive violence, and additional detectives were drafted in to help with the case. In May 2005, Emma's face was projected onto one of the city's tower blocks in the hope of jogging people's memories and leading to more witnesses coming forward. Detective Constable Stuart Hall was one of the officers brought in to help with the case. It was his first murder inquiry. During familiarisation with all aspects of the case, he recalled an item of note. A piece of cable had been found under Emma's neck. The post-mortem had showed that Emma had been strangled, and it was thought that this cable had been used to throttle her. One end of this cable was quite distinctive in that it had been damaged, almost as though it had been burnt. Statements were taken from other sex workers in the area, and one woman told the police that Emma had a client who was particularly obsessed with her. If Emma was out working, this man would speed up and drive his van towards her if another potential client approached her. He was looking to scare them away so that Emma could just be his. The woman went on to detail how shortly before Emma's murder, this man had picked up Emma, took her to an area behind some billboards and sexually assaulted her. Not long after hearing this statement, Detective Constable Stuart Hall learned that the police had stopped a van in the red light area. The driver matched the description given of the man who had assaulted Emma. The van was sign written for the company Alpha Beta Signs. With previous knowledge of neon signs, Stuart believed that the unusual burnt cable found with Emma's body could have been used to repair a neon sign. The van was found to belong to a man by the name of Iain Packer. Iain, who was 32 at the time, was a sign erector and was spoken to for the first time by the police on the 22nd of June 2005. This was 6 weeks after Emma's body had been found. Did Iain know Emma? No. Did he frequent the red light district in Glasgow? No. Did he use the services of sex workers? No. Before being let go, his photograph was taken and put into a photo book along with 11 other men. These photographs were shown to the woman who had provided details about Emma's sexual assault. She immediately identified Iain. Other sex workers also identified Iain as a man who would regularly use their services, almost on a daily basis. All of them said that he was a violent man. If they didn't do exactly as he wanted, he would become angry and vicious. Many had said how scared they were of him. By now, Iain had been identified as a violent sexual predator by multiple people. The police had confirmation that he was obsessed with Emma and had previously sexually assaulted her, and Iain had lied about his use of sex workers. He was brought in for questioning again, and Detective Constable Stuart Hall wanted to detain Iain for Emma's murder. Iain's story kept changing every time. Stuart contacted the senior investigating officer, Willie Johnston, and said that he believed that Iain was no longer a witness and was in fact the main suspect, but he was told, "Do not detain him, he is not our man, release him." The investigation continued but did not really progress. All avenues seemed to lead back to Iain. In 2006, Magdalene Robinson was interviewed by the police. She told them that when she was 14 years old, Iain had become a friend of her family. She detailed how he would grope and touch her and would sit on her bed while she slept. He went on to severely sexually assault her, but no one believed her at the time and accused her of making it up. However, after the police asked for her statement, she heard nothing more from them. Former partners of Iain's were also interviewed with their statements, once again providing an extreme pattern of violent physical and sexual abuse. The sex workers had a book called the Beware Book, in which they warned each other about violent clients. Iain would feature in this book over and over again, with details provided by different women detailing extreme violence and sexual assaults. Sometimes he would be known as Peter, other times Craig or John. He was short but powerfully built, and his lack of personal hygiene was so extreme that many of the women believed it was a power thing. When shown pictures, all of these women verified that their entries in the book related to Iain. The workers tried to report the attacks to the police, with one worker going into details about how Iain had tried to strangle her in the months before Emma's murder. A security guard approached the van as she was being attacked and she managed to escape. However, when 2 police officers stopped her as she was running away and she told them what had happened, they said that she should not have been working in the area and she was arrested for prostitution. The team investigating the murder continued to gather evidence. They asked many of the workers if they had ever been taken to a remote location similar to where Emma's body had been found. The police took statements from 3 other women who had been driven to what was thought to be the same remote location, and then also a further 6 who had been driven to a different location. All were sexually assaulted. All identified Iain as their attacker. One worker, Pauline, described a man who she knew as Peter, who drove her out of the city, down a motorway, then into the countryside in the middle of nowhere. He stopped and insisted that she take off all of her clothes. When she didn't comply, he became very aggressive. She tried to calm him down, but when she was unsuccessful, she went along with his demands. During interviews with the police, she repeatedly mentioned this remote location. She was shown the photo book and identified Iain as the man she knew as Peter. Emma's body had been found in a remote forest location approximately 43 miles from the streets of Glasgow where she worked. The route would mean driving south on the M74 and then winding through remote country lanes. The police asked Pauline if she could remember the route. They followed her description, going down a road with Christmas trees either side, a bus stop, a silver gate, the bump of a cattle grid. Pauline's description took them to the exact spot in the woodland where Emma's body had been found. It was in an area that was so remote that many of the detectives struggled to find it. It wasn't a spot that you could just wander into. You would need to know the area. This appeared to be the breakthrough that the investigating team so desperately needed. There was no way that it could be a coincidence that Iain had terrorised Pauline in the exact spot that Emma's body had been found. It would seem that the evidence was now undeniable, and the senior investigating officer would surely agree to Iain's arrest. Shockingly, there were still no charges brought. To Detective Constable Stuart Hall, none of this made sense. Shortly afterwards, he was taken into a room and told that he was no longer to work on the case of Iain Packer. He was also told that he should not interview him again, inquire about Iain, talk to the sex workers about Iain, or try to gather any more information about him. It would seem that the higher ranking officers had decided the direction that they wanted the inquiry to go in. On the night she went missing, the last call that Emma received was from a Turkish man named Abubekir Onku. The call was received at 11:20 p.m. and they talked for 76 seconds. When interviewed, Abubekir told the police that he had had one sexual encounter with Emma and that he had not seen her on the night of her murder. They did not believe him. A second secret part of the murder investigation was underway. This became known as Operation Guard. The man leading this investigation was Detective Chief Inspector Colin Field. It was established that Emma had been in the vicinity of a Turkish cafe in Glasgow on the night she disappeared. This cafe was run by a convicted sex offender, Hussein Shobanoglu. Abubekir Onku said that he had never been to the cafe nor had any connection to Hussein Shobanoglu. It was however known that some of the sex workers had both worked in and at times been sexually assaulted in this cafe. The senior officers believed that Emma had been murdered at the cafe and ordered surveillance in an attempt to link Abubekir Onku to Hussein Shobanoglu and the cafe. The evidence did not materialise. The case against the Turkish men appeared to be in trouble until forensics found 2 spots of Emma's blood on bedding at the cafe, and the senior officers took the case to the next level. They authorised the most intrusive level of surveillance possible, bugging the Turkish cafe with covert video and audio devices being installed in the premises. An undercover Turkish police officer was also sent in with the hope that the senior officers would get the incriminating evidence that they needed to move the case forward. However, in order for the eventual case against the Turkish men to stand up in court, all other potential suspects needed to have been traced, interviewed, and eliminated from the inquiry. And that meant conclusively ruling out Iain Packer, the man with so much evidence that pointed to his guilt. In August 2006, Detective Constable David Barr was given the instruction to interview Iain again and get a statement confirming that Iain knew Emma Caldwell, but, according to David, was told by a senior investigating officer, Willie Johnston, that it doesn't matter what he tells you, he won't be accused ever in this case. During this interview with DC David Barr, Iain admitted knowing Emma and using her and other sex workers' services. He claimed that he had previously lied because he was scared. He also said that he had taken her out into the countryside to the area where her body was found. At this point, the interviewing officer, Willie Mason, wanted to detain Iain for Emma's murder. They contacted Willie Johnston at home, who reiterated his previous instruction that Iain was not being accused of anything and to let him go home. Willie Mason then queried this with DCI Colin Field, whom he believed was behind the decision. Colin Field said that Iain was not a suspect in this case. The Turks done it. To which Willie Mason replied, with the greatest of respects, how can he not be a suspect? He's the only person who has ever admitted taking her to the murder site. Colin Field said that there was no inquiry into Iain, that Iain had not killed Emma, and that he had facts to prove that the Turkish men had committed the murder. A few days after this, Willie Mason was told that his services were no longer required on the inquiry. It was clear that the secret Operation Guard, and not the public Operation Grail, was running the show. Soon after, there was a briefing for all involved where everyone was made aware of the background of Operation Guard. The brief was that 4 Turkish men had been identified as Emma's killers in the Turkish cafe on Bridge Street, and anyone else that they had suspected of being involved should be forgotten about, as Emma's killers had been found. It was said that the recording devices had picked up the men talking about Emma's murder in a way that only the killers would know, using phrases such as, "They brought her here, didn't they? Yeah, they took the girl all the way. Did the girl ever come here? Yes, she came here." However, none of these phrases could actually prove their guilt, so the surveillance continued. In order to ensure that there was nothing that could be challenged at the future trial of these men, they needed to ensure that Iain's confession about taking Emma, Pauline and other sex workers to the remote woodland, which he subsequently said he made up just because the police were hounding him, would not be seen as true. Iain was taken by car with some officers and told to take them to the site where Emma's body had been found. Iain claimed that he did not know where they were going, and when asked if they should go left or right, he just said take a left. He ended up taking the police officers directly to the remote site, which was so difficult to find. Nevertheless, when they returned to the police station and the paperwork was completed, he was told that he was free to leave, that he wouldn't be hearing from the police again, and to get on with his life. As the covert surveillance on the Turkish cafe continued, with nothing that could justify bringing charges, the decision was made to review the thousands of hours of recordings on better equipment in the hope of finding something that was missed. On a recording from the 7th of April 2006, the police said that they heard, through the jacket at the casino, "They killed the girl." A short distance from the cafe was a casino, and a search of the grounds there revealed 2 items. An item of clothing that senior officers decided belonged to Emma, and a horseshoe keyring, which could have belonged to Emma, particularly due to her love of horses. They believed that was the final piece of the jigsaw. On the 31st of August 2007, it was reported that 4 men had been arrested in connection with Emma's death, and that the police were searching an address on Bridge Street on the south side of Glasgow, and another on Duke Street in the city's East End. One of the men arrested was Abubakar Onku, who was interviewed by Detective Sergeant Mick McCarran. Mick had been given access to some of the covert recordings for the interview and was told that they had been translated by the foremost Turkish-speaking experts in the land. Abubakar kept reiterating that the translations were wrong and was almost ridiculing Mick, who by this time was convinced that Abubakar had nothing to do with the murder. However, Mick was repeatedly told by senior officers to continue with the interview. As instructed, at the end of the interview, Mick charged Abubakar with Emma's murder. Within weeks, one of the men's defence lawyers challenged the accuracy of the translations, and the police were told by the Crown to get the tapes retranslated. It would transpire that the tapes were not in fact translated by Turkish-speaking experts, but instead by fellow police officers of Turkish descent. One readily admitted to having limited understanding of Turkish, whilst the other was educated to O-level standard. When the recordings were checked by qualified independent translators, not one damning admission was heard. They had been translated incorrectly or misquoted and put out of context. The conversation about belongings near a casino did not actually happen. The clothes and keyring were never proven to belong to Emma, and the 2 small spots of blood found on the mattress could easily be explained, as it was known that Emma had worked at the cafe. At this point, the investigation, which had cost approximately £4 million, collapsed. Surprisingly, in the years that followed, Iain was never held to account by the police. In 2018, he took part in an interview in which he said that he wanted to get his side of the story across, as many people believed that he was a killer. In this, he admitted to the sporadic use of sex workers, but claimed that he was not a violent man and was not rough with any of them. He denied that he was a sexually violent predator. He denied sexually assaulting or murdering Emma. He denied the sexual assault of Magdalene. He said that he had never been to the place Emma's body had been found, and then said that some of the lies he told to the police were due to fear or just being hounded into making false confessions. It would take another 4 years and changes to the people in authority for Iain to be finally charged with Emma's murder. He continued to maintain his innocence. On the 28th of February 2024, after a 6-week trial and 4 days of jury deliberations, he was found guilty of killing Emma as well as 32 other charges against 22 different women. Most of them were committed after Emma's murder. He was sentenced to at least 36 years in prison. This is the second longest jail term handed down by a Scottish court, only behind the 37-year minimum given to the World's End killer Angus Sinclair in 2014. On the 7th of March, the Scottish Government announced a judge-led public inquiry, and the Lord Advocate confirmed that a criminal investigation into the first police investigation is also planned. It would take 17 years for Iain to be arrested for Emma's murder, and it is unclear exactly how many other women have suffered at his hands during this time. Attacks that could have been prevented had the evidence connected to Emma's murder been followed, and the officers who made the clear case against him been actually listened to. The senior officers involved gave Iain the freedom and ability to continue his violence towards women. Senior Investigating Officer Detective Superintendent Willie Johnston retired in 2006. Detective Chief Superintendent Colin Field retired in 2014. Police Scotland have said Emma Caldwell, her family and many other victims were let down by policing in 2005. For that we are sorry. A significant number of women and girls who showed remarkable courage to speak up at that time also did not get the justice and support they needed and deserved from Strathclyde Police. Packer is currently serving his time in Barlinnie Prison. After an initial investigation by the Sunday Mail 10 years after Emma's death, without the journalist Samantha Poling doing some amazing investigation work, it is possible that Packer may still have been a free man today. Rest in peace to Emma and to all of Packer's victims. That concludes today's case. Please subscribe if you're new to the channel and click like and comment down below. Thanks very much for listening to the Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. Even Packer's ex-wife has said in an interview that Packer tried to murder her 9 years ago. Goodbye.